A young woman lived only 24 years, never left the convent, never wrote many books, never performed miracles during her lifetime. Yet why does the whole world call her the little flower of God? And why has the thin book, Story of a Soul, transformed millions of hearts for more than 1 century? What made a quiet nun in Lisieux, canonized in 1925, declared Patroness of the missions in 1927, and become the youngest doctor of the Church in history in 1997? Let us enter the journey of Saint Thérèse of the Child Jesus, where small acts open a spiritual treasure, where a humble soul leaves a legacy that crosses every border and continues to let fall upon the world the rose petals of love and salvation. Before we begin, please leave the word Amen in the comments to join in prayer. Do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel to watch more touching stories about the saints. Every like and comment you offer is a small act of sharing, helping the video reach more people so that together we can contemplate the lives of the saints and be inspired to live more holy lives each day. The light of an early winter morning in 1873 seemed to cast a gentle mist over the city of Alençon. In the small home of the Martin family, the newborn cry of Saint Thérèse of the Child Jesus rose on January 02, marking the beginning of a journey whose profound meaning the world would only understand much later. Her father, Saint Louis Martin, and her mother, Saint Zélie Martin, were a devout couple whose lives left a rare imprint on the history of Christian families. From the very start, the atmosphere of that home seemed woven with simplicity, pure love, and a constant awareness of God's presence in the ordinary movements of daily life. In the arms of her parents, Saint Thérèse was the youngest of 9 siblings. Her early years unfolded in the warmth of a deeply spiritual family, yet they were soon overshadowed by painful losses. 4 of her siblings died at a very young age. The empty cradles, the silent rooms, and the wordless tears in the night left marks on her tender heart. That mist of sorrow settled over her sensitive soul like a shadow, making her little heart easily moved, easily wounded, and easily drawn to the sheltering arms of those older than herself. Just as her childhood seemed peaceful, another blow struck when she was 4 years old. Her beloved mother passed away, leaving a void that nothing in the world could fill. In the innocent eyes of Saint Thérèse, the world suddenly became vast and unfamiliar. She constantly sought protection, feared separation, and carried within her an insecurity that followed her throughout her early years. Losing her mother so soon inclined her soul toward God, as if reaching for a place where love never departs. From that fragility, God was quietly preparing a soul woven in weakness, destined to become a sign of a spiritual path filled with light. In the Martin family, God was present not only in evening prayers, but also in the daily care they offered one another. At this time, her sister Paulina became the one who replaced their mother in caring for Saint Thérèse. Paulinache covered a sense of safety that had vanished after her mother's death. The gentle affection of her eldest sister was like a warm breath, soothing the delicate tremors of Thérèse's heart. In each small gesture, each soft reminder, Paulina planted in her younger sister the first awareness of a greater love. As she watched Paulina pray and saw her rely on God, Saint Thérèse began to understand that there was a place where the human soul could dwell, a place untouched by loss or change. From those quiet moments beside Paulina, a strange desire began to grow within Thérèse. She felt the first stirring of a dream to belong entirely to God, to offer herself as the holy ones had done. Her childhood years were marked not only by tears, but also by the light of a spiritual beginning. Her inner wounds made her more ready to receive the beauty of God's love. She sensed that her small heart, though limited, still held room for an infinite love calling to her. And from that very weakness, a new soul was being formed, silent yet strong, destined to become one of the brightest lights of the Church. In the stillness of childhood, everything seemed to be preparing for a journey only God could see in full. Those young eyes would grow through trials, shaped by love, and led into the little way, where fragility itself becomes the place where God reveals his strength. And from this very beginning, the life of Saint Thérèse unfolded as an invitation to enter a land of things that seem small, yet carry the transforming power of a spiritual treasure. When Saint Zélie Martin passed away, the Martin family left Alençon for Lisieux, a small city in Normandy. That decision was like a turning point of destiny, leading Saint Thérèse into an environment that nurtured the spiritual depth that later became the wellspring of the Little Way. The house on Saint Bernard Street, where she lived with her father, Saint Louis Martin, and her sisters, was not only a shelter after their loss, but a place where the atmosphere of prayer permeated every rhythm of life. There, she was surrounded by hearts that knew how to place Christ at the center, and from that protection, a sensitive soul gradually took shape in the light of faith. Although she lived in such a holy atmosphere, the childhood of Saint Thérèse went through many interior storms that she could not express. Her mother's death touched a very deep place in her heart, making her small soul easily fall into states of anxiety. Long episodes of crying, sudden emotional outbursts without clear cause, and a strong sense of dependence on her sisters forced her to live with a wide-reaching insecurity. The love she had for her father and sisters helped her remain steady, but her sensitivity made her easily swept into the shadows of her own emotions. For many years, she had to wrestle with herself, as if searching for a way out of an inner fog. As time passed, that fragility became even more apparent. When Pauline, the sister to whom Saint Thérèse was most deeply attached, entered the Carmelite order, Thérèse fell into a vast emptiness. That pain did not stir rebellion, but seemed to deepen the sense of loneliness in her soul. In the months that followed, she was often drawn into sudden psychological crises that caused her family great concern. At times, she felt as if all life had been drained from her body, leaving behind an emptiness that words could not reach. Her soul grew as fragile as a flower, trembling before a light breeze, carrying with it a constant fear of abandonment. It was in that context that a strange event occurred in 1883, when Saint Thérèse fell gravely ill and slipped into a state of weakness without a clear cause. Her sisters knelt by her bed and prayed, asking the Virgin Mary to protect their younger sister. In a moment of silence, Thérèse lifted her gaze to the statue of the Virgin Mary placed in the room. Her eyes seemed to meet a warm light, radiating from that gentle face. She recounted that the Virgin Mary smiled. That smile did not speak, yet it carried a power that reason could not explain. She felt her soul freed from its spiritual paralysis, like warm water flowing into the driest part of her heart. That day, Saint Thérèse stood up like someone who had just stepped out of a deep abyss, leaving the illness behind as the first mark of grace. The years after the event of the Virgin's smile were not entirely peaceful. Sensitivity and insecurity still seemed to cling to her, but from within silence, her soul was drawn toward another light, a place where weakness was no longer a burden, but a point of encounter between her and God. Saint Thérèse entered adolescence with a small bundle of tears, invisible tremors, and a spiritual intuition that was growing in its own way. And then came the night of Christmas, 1886. The church was filled with candlelight, and the atmosphere overflowed with the serenity of the night when the Son of God was born. At the Martin family home, the Christmas reunion took place as it did every year, but within Saint Thérèse, there was a profound inner transformation. As she stepped onto the staircase after the liturgy, she felt a new strength flooding her entire being. A flame ignited in her heart, freeing her from the emotional dependence that had bound her for so many years. She described that God on that night transformed her into someone strong and steadfast on a path she could hardly imagine. That Christmas night she called the second conversion, like a new chapter opening in her spiritual life. From that moment on, the soul of Saint Thérèse no longer trembled before the darkness within. She stepped forward as one reborn. This spiritual maturity opened the way for a strong call toward consecrated life. Her little way began precisely on that night, when the light of the infant Jesus reached the deepest part of her soul, transforming a fragile little girl into a young woman filled with the desire to offer herself. Those segments seemed to prepare her for a life in which every step was illuminated by love and absolute trust in God. After Christmas night, 1886, the soul of Saint Thérèse seemed to be led into a new rhythm of life. A spiritual strength rose within her, widening the path that God had quietly prepared for many years. As she entered the age of 15, her desire to offer her entire life to God became intense. That love was not a passing emotion, but the fruit of a childhood marked by tears, by events shaped by grace, and by inner maturity following her conversion night. Therefore, when Saint Thérèse presented her wish to enter the Carmelite order of Lisieux, every word she spoke came from the deepest part of her soul, where she felt the call of Christ resounding like a tender invitation. Yet the reality before her did not open easily. At 15, Saint Thérèse was considered too young for the austere religious life of Carmel. The parish priests, followed by the diocesan superior, successively rejected her petition. They believed that her physical and emotional endurance was not yet strong enough, and the fear that she might struggle with the severe challenges inside the convent made them hesitant. These refusals were like layers of thick mist settling upon her, testing the determination of a soul still very young, but already placing its entire destiny into God's hands. Even so, she kept her inner peace, for the love of God had become a quiet flame that could not be extinguished. This longing led Saint Thérèse into a journey filled with courage. In November 1887, she traveled with Saint Louis Martin and her sister Céline to Rome on a pilgrimage meant to strengthen faith. The long journey through many European cities opened her soul to the vastness of the Church and deepened her desire to become a small instrument in God's hands. The height of the trip was the audience with Pope Leo XIII at the Vatican. When her turn came, Saint Thérèse knelt before him, her eyes full of longing. Despite earlier instructions not to request anything, she still voiced her desire, asking the Holy Father for permission to enter Carmel. That moment was like an important scene in her life. Strength radiated from a small figure, and her words were not a plea, but the voice of a soul, seeking the way back to the one she loved. The Pope, with pastoral prudence, did not give immediate approval but gently said that if God willed it, the door would be opened. Even though the response was not what she had hoped for, Saint Thérèse returned to Lisieux with the conviction that God was leading her by another path, one where patience would be refined like gold in fire. 1 year later, that perseverance was rewarded. On the 9th of April 1888, Saint Thérèse officially entered the Carmelite monastery of Lisieux, beginning the religious life she had long desired. That morning, she stepped through the cloister gate as one steps across a threshold into a new life. Inside there was no splendor, only simple walls, silent corridors, and an atmosphere filled with the presence of God. It was there that her soul was nourished by the contemplative rhythm of Carmel, a rhythm woven from prayer, sacrifice, and silence. The first months in the order were a time of deep testing. Saint Thérèse faced inner dryness so heavy that prayer felt burdensome. She encountered small misunderstandings in community life, and differences in temperament forced her to learn patience on the path of love. Outside the monastery, Saint Louis Martin fell gravely ill, leaving a wound in the heart of the youngest daughter, who had always been deeply attached to him. That sorrow became a silent cross she carried through every hour of prayer. Yet these trials strengthened the heart of Saint Thérèse. Her inner weakness did not disappear, but wrapped in God's love, it became fertile ground for virtue to grow. Step by step, she entered consecrated life like someone walking through mist, guided by light, knowing that on the other side God's hand always awaited. Those early months of religious life were a time of preparation, where she was shaped to become an instrument of peace, a small soul filled with the fire of salvific love. Before we continue, I want to share that this channel was created for those who love the saints and long to enter more deeply into the spiritual heritage they left. If you are interested in this journey of faith, please subscribe and turn on notifications to walk with us. May God, through the intercession of the saints, pour blessings upon all who have supported this channel with a like. Before moving to the next part, I want to share one small note. This channel was founded for those who cherish the saints, who desire to contemplate and practice the sacred legacy they handed down. If these themes speak to you, please subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss any video. May God's grace, through the intercession of the saints, be poured abundantly upon all who liked this video. Thank you very much. Now, without circling around any further, let us enter the main section. On the morning of 08 September 1890, the atmosphere of the Carmelite monastery of Lisieux seemed immersed in a gentle light when Saint Thérèse professed her perpetual vows on the feast of the Nativity of the Virgin Mary. The ceremony that day did not bear the splendor of an earthly wedding, but it contained a spiritual depth that language could not fully express. In the simple attire of a nun, she approached the altar as if entering an eternal covenant. The silence of the morning, the low prayers, and the shimmering candlelight seemed to lead her into a spiritual union where the soul is given entirely to Christ. Many years later, when recalling that day, she called it the wedding of the heart, where love reached its purest act of total consecration. From that moment, the interior life of Saint Thérèse entered a deep and steady rhythm. She realized that God was not calling her to accomplish great deeds, but was leading her into the hidden path of trust. The spirituality that the Church would later name the Little Way sprouted precisely from that simplicity. In every small task of monastic life, from washing clothes, sweeping the courtyard, to the night hours of prayer, she quietly offered her whole heart to God. What gave value was not the task itself, but the love present in every gesture. From the day of her profession, she lived like one entering a new world, where each breath could become a prayer, and every small sacrifice could become a fragrant offering to God. The light of that spirituality was also nurtured by a special contemplation that Saint Thérèse dedicated to the holy face of Jesus. In the small prayer room of the Carmel of Lisieux, she spent many hours silently contemplating the face of the suffering Christ. When she looked at the eyes and the forehead marked with signs of pain, she felt as though she were entering more deeply into the mystery of self-giving love. It was her attachment to the suffering holy face that caused her to be known as Thérèse of the Holy Face. For her, that face did not evoke sadness, but was an invitation to offer herself in love and mercy. She realized that every pain she bore, even the smallest, could be joined to Christ's sacrifice, and in that communion, the soul was transformed. The monastic rhythm of Saint Thérèse continued to reveal profound theological insights. In her later writings, she described the journey of discovering the mercy of God as a stream of water flowing through the soul, carrying away every fear and imperfection. She understood that God calls the human person not through demands, but through infinite patience. Absolute mercy became the center of her thought, turning all her spiritual reflections into a hymn of praise to the love that seeks the soul before the soul seeks God. In the light of that interior revelation, Saint Thérèse spent much time reflecting on the meaning of hidden sacrifice. She realized that in the smallest things, God is concealed and waiting to be received with love. When enduring a misunderstanding, when quietly bearing difficulty, or when smiling at a sister who was weary, she felt as if she were placing small petals at the feet of God. These were silent acts, yet powerful enough to move the heart of God, because they were done with a love free of calculation. The little way that Saint Thérèse discovered was not an easy path. It required perseverance in the small matters of daily life and fidelity in the face of interior trials. But from that simplicity, she perceived that the soul was being led by God into a new depth where weakness became the dwelling place of grace. Like a small seed sown into the moist soil of the Carmel of Lisieux, her spirituality grew gently, silently, yet firmly. The day of her profession in 1890 not only opened a new chapter in the life of Saint Thérèse, but also laid the foundation for a spirituality that would spread throughout the world. In the silence of the monastery of Lisieux, a lamp was lit, carrying a light that generations after would continue to receive. The years that followed would form the journey in which the little way would be refined and become a shining gem within the heart of the Church. And from here, the life of Saint Thérèse entered a new stage where self-offering and contemplation blended, leading the soul closer to the one she loved with her whole heart. As the religious life of Saint Thérèse settled into a steady rhythm, the days in Carmel of Lisieux opened with a simple yet powerful beauty. Each morning, when the first bell rang in the lingering chill of the night, she quietly stepped into a new day with the spirit of one who wished to offer every breath to God. In the monastery, it was easy for people to overlook small tasks, but for Saint Thérèse, each of them held immeasurable value. Whether she swept the courtyard, carried water, worked in the kitchen, or washed habits, those gestures became hymns of humility because she carried them out with a love entirely directed toward God. Her religious life was woven from small details, yet those very details became the pearls of the spirituality that later came to be known as the little way. In daily tasks, Saint Thérèse found the joy of one who offers herself. When working in the garden, she felt as though she were tending the soil God had entrusted to her, each small plant a reminder of how he tends the human soul in silence. When washing clothes for the sisters, she saw each garment as a symbol of their lives, always needing to be kept pure in the light of faith. When cooking, she understood that the simple meals of the monastery were part of the communion of the community, where God was present through invisible grace. Her whole day flowed like a chain of hidden offerings in which every small act carried the warmth of love. In that quietness, Saint Thérèse gradually became the gentle sister of the entire community. Her tenderness had the power to heal hardened hearts. When facing sisters who were difficult or burdened with anxiety, she did not respond with reproach, but with a soft smile, a deep gaze, and an atmosphere of peace. She knew that some burdens could not be lifted by reasoning, but by gentle presence. Her patience in daily life planted in the Carmelites of Lisieux a sense of being supported. They saw in her the image of someone who loved, with a heart purified by God through small trials. That gentleness did not come from natural temperament, but from constant spiritual effort. Saint Thérèse once shared that there were sisters she found difficult to approach, yet she always prayed for the grace to see the face of Christ in them. Each time she succeeded, her heart opened gently. Because of this, community life in the Carmel of Lisieux became a space of peace, sustained by the quiet charity of a young nun who carried within her the fire of absolute love. One of the important milestones in the spiritual life of Saint Thérèse was when her superior asked her to write down her inner experiences. From that request, Story of a Soul gradually took shape. The first pages were written in humility, for she always believed she was only a small soul. Yet when she sat at her desk, her reflections, her vivid emotions, and her deep experiences of God's love flowed onto the page with clarity. This work was not an autobiography in the usual sense, but a spiritual testimony written from the union of contemplation and the reality of daily life. In each page, readers sense the light of a spirituality with the power to move hearts. Saint Thérèse did not teach as a thinker, but opened her heart with honest experiences so that others might recognize the call to return to God. After its publication, Story of a Soul became a precious jewel of Christian spirituality, bringing inner strength to countless souls around the world. Many readers saw themselves in the weaknesses she described, and they also saw in her the light that guided them through their own shadows. Not stopping at being a gentle sister and a spiritual writer, Saint Thérèse also carried within her a quiet missionary heart. Even though she never left the monastery of Lisieux, she lived the spirit of mission through prayer. She dedicated hours of prayer for priests, asking God to strengthen them in the difficulties of their ministry. She remembered especially those who had not yet recognized God's love, offering each day's sacrifices for souls who had wandered far. One of the memorable stories was the case of Henri Pranzini, a death row prisoner convicted of grave crimes. Saint Thérèse learned of him through the newspapers and decided to pray with all the love she had for his soul. She never met him, yet every prayer she offered for Pranzini carried the belief that God could transform a human heart even in the final moment. After his execution, the newspapers reported that before dying, he took the crucifix and kissed the wounds of Christ. When she read this, Saint Thérèse understood that her plea had been heard. It was one of the first proofs of the power of the little way. Those years marked the spiritual maturity of Saint Thérèse. Her love for God permeated every task, every action, and every prayer. Her religious life, though hidden, became a source of grace that spread outward. Her humility illuminated a spirituality that the whole world would later seek. And from that small monastery, a light was kindled to guide souls longing to enter the mystery of God's love. When the final pages of Story of a Soul were still being written, the life of Saint Thérèse entered a stage where spiritual light met the darkness of illness. In 1896, a seemingly harmless prolonged cough became the first sign of tuberculosis. At first, she paid no attention, because throughout her monastic life, she had always been accustomed to small physical fatigues. But the cough gradually grew more serious, bringing with it a marked weakening of her body. When blood appeared on the cloth, she understood that God was leading her into a deeper path of sacrifice, where even each breath would become a prayer united with the passion of Jesus. In the first months of her illness, Saint Thérèse maintained her monastic routine as usual. She attended the hours of prayer, fulfilled her duties in the convent, and tried to live with a heart open to every event. But the illness became increasingly severe. Each cough seemed to tear her chest apart, leaving in her body a sense of emptiness and exhaustion. Even so, the pain did not make her retreat. She saw suffering as part of the love God had for her soul, and by accepting it, she felt she was drawing nearer to the one she loved. Her room became a place of silent sacrifice, where every pain was offered for souls in need of salvation. It was not only illness that tested her body, for the soul of Saint Thérèse also entered a long night. She recounted that it seemed as if every spiritual consolation she had ever felt had been taken away. In prayer, she felt a heavy silence, as though God were standing far away. The peace she once knew was replaced by a feeling of emptiness, as if the soul had been left in a darkness without direction. This was the greatest trial a soul that loves God can endure. However, instead of despairing, Saint Thérèse chose to believe. That is what illuminated her spirituality. While feeling nothing, she still decided to love God with her whole will. In one passage, she confided that her weak faith had to support those who had lost theirs, and this interior choice made her night a light for others. She was not afraid of the darkness because she knew that God remained present there even in silence. The silence of God did not make her retreat, but made her surrender more fully. This is what gave her final trial its theological depth. She lived in darkness without falling into despair, like one placing each step into mystery while her heart rested in God's hands. As the illness advanced, her strength diminished visibly. From a young nun who worked tirelessly, she became someone who could only lie in bed and offer God a gentle gaze, even while her body suffered. The sisters in the convent clearly saw this weakening, but what moved them was not the illness, but the peace that remained on her face. When pain came, she did not complain. When night fell, she did not ask anyone to stay by her. Each smile she gave to the community carried the strength of a soul completely surrendered. Those who cared for her recounted that at times they saw her close her eyes as if listening to something that did not belong to this world, as though her soul had already gone ahead into the dwelling place of eternal love. In her final months, the sick room of Saint Thérèse became a gathering place of silent holiness. The soft sounds of prayers, the footsteps of the sisters who visited, and the atmosphere filled with the love of the community created a space that seemed wrapped in sanctity. As each day passed, She was led into a depth that only souls fully surrendered can enter. In that room, the life of Saint Thérèse was like a small candle burning to its last drop, yet its light remained bright. On the afternoon of 30 September 1897, the atmosphere in the monastery grew quieter than usual. The sisters sensed that the final hour of Saint Thérèse was near. When the clock struck 19 hours 20 minutes, her soul crossed the threshold of earthly life. Before closing her eyes, she uttered the words the world would remember, "My God, I love you." It was the conclusion of a life woven by love, and also the beginning of a new journey in heaven. Saint Thérèse departed at only 24 years of age, but that moment did not bear the mark of sorrow. It was like the return of a soul into the embrace of the one she had loved with everything she had. Illness, the night of faith, physical suffering, and her final smiles became a silent hymn that lifted the little way to its summit. And in the twilight of the final day of 1897, a small flower of God was gathered into heaven to spread its fragrance throughout the entire church for all eternity. When Saint Thérèse breathed her last on the afternoon of the 30th of September 1897, the Carmelite community of Lisieux fell into a silence soaked in the sacred. No one in that small monastery could have imagined that the hidden life of a young nun who had never left the four walls of Carmel would open one of the most radiant chapters of the spiritual history of the century. From the simple room where she rested, a quiet light began to spread, preparing to touch cities, parishes, monasteries, and countless souls throughout the world. Shortly after Saint Thérèse passed away, the Superior decided to publish Story of a Soul, the manuscript that recorded her inner journey. Those pages, written from the depths of a humble soul, carried a vitality no one could have foreseen. When the book was released, readers in France received it with astonishment. In a short time, the work spread beyond borders, through Europe to Canada, the United States, then to Asia and distant mission territories. In homes, churches, and monasteries, people found in it the story of a small soul that radiated the liberating light so many hearts longed for. What made Story of a Soul unique was not only its simplicity, but the spiritual depth of the little way. Saint Thérèse showed that holiness is not a privilege reserved for extraordinary souls, but is offered to anyone who knows how to trust, who knows how to offer themselves in the hidden tasks of daily life. Because of this, readers found in the book consolation, guidance, and a holy light that led them back to God with childlike hearts. The book quickly became a global spiritual phenomenon, compared to a refreshing stream in an age full of turmoil. That wide influence prompted the Church to begin the canonization process. In 1925, Pope Pius XI solemnly canonized Saint Thérèse of Lisieux before tens of thousands of faithful in Rome. The ceremony took place in the solemn atmosphere of St. Peter's Square, where hymns rose like a thanksgiving for the spirituality of a woman who had lived the gospel fully in silence. Only 2 years later, in 1927, Pius XI named Saint Thérèse the patroness of the missions. It seemed a holy paradox, for she had never set foot in any mission land. Yet her prayers for those who proclaimed the gospel and her burning desire to bring God's love to all peoples led the Church to recognize in her a great missionary heart. Devotion to Saint Thérèse continued to grow with each passing decade. Many religious orders, parishes, and associations chose her as patroness, and the image of the little flower blossomed in Christian spirituality as a symbol of humility and trust. To understand her stature, the Church looked not only at her writings or her intercession, but at the theological depth contained in the little way. Her reflections on faith, love, and mercy carried an inner weight respected by theologians across ages. For this reason, in 1997, on the centenary of her entrance into heaven, Pope John Paul II declared Saint Thérèse of the Child Jesus a doctor of the Church. This rare honor placed her among the great teachers of the faith and made her the youngest doctor in the history of the Church. Along with the title of doctor, the life of Saint Thérèse continued to be confirmed through countless miracles. Across the world, people told stories of healings, conversions, and spiritual interventions that occurred after they invoked her. Many families found peace in hardship, many lost souls regained faith, and many sick people received strange comfort in their final days. These miracles were not dramatic, but gentle as a breeze, just as Saint Thérèse had lived her entire life. In particular, the sign of the rose became a familiar symbol of her presence. Before her death, Saint Thérèse had said she would let fall a shower of roses from heaven. Since then, many believers recounted that at moments when they sought her help, rose petals appeared in mysterious ways, as if inviting them to trust more deeply in God's love. For them, those petals were not simply the kindness of nature, but a response from a holy soul continuing her mission in heaven. The legacy of Saint Thérèse does not lie in grand works, but in the deep transformation of countless hearts. She opened for the world a simple way to reach God, where smallness becomes the path to infinite love. Her quiet footsteps in the monastery of Lisieux still echo like a guiding hymn, and her writings remain a torch for those seeking salvation. From the last century to today, the stream of the little way continues to flow, touching souls in need of support. And in every age, Saint Thérèse continues to let fall her petals upon the world, as the promise of one who offered her whole self to eternal love. As the journey into the life of Saint Thérèse of the Child Jesus reaches its conclusion, the listener's soul seems to pause at the threshold of an inner sanctuary. In that place, every effort and every story settles into silence to make room for the whisper of prayer. Her life, from her childhood loss of her mother, through the years of battling illness and the night of faith, to the final moments in which she offered all her love to God, becomes a gentle stream flowing through our hearts, inviting each of us to enter the simple yet radiant path. And in this moment, prayer seems to rise from a deep place, where the soul rediscovers peace. Saint Thérèse of the Child Jesus, we come before you with gratitude and reverence. Before the image of a young woman hidden in the Lisieux convent, we behold the light of a spirituality that transcends every age. We ask you to guide us in the small steps of daily life. May the tasks that seem insignificant today become opportunities for us to love God, just as you once turned each breath and every smile into an offering. Teach us to recognize the presence of God in the simplest things, so that our hearts may always live in thanksgiving. In moments of difficulty, may we trust as you trusted. You endured the silent trials of childhood, entered the night of faith so deep that you no longer felt consolation from God. Yet within that darkness, you chose light. You chose to love even when you did not feel loved, to believe even when your soul was covered in mist, to surrender even when the pain of tuberculosis was wearing down your body day and night. Saint Thérèse, instill in us a portion of that strength. Help us to live in a faith that does not depend on fleeting emotions, but on unwavering fidelity to the one who loved us first. We also ask you to intercede for the Church today. In a world full of upheaval, where people are swept up in the noise of work and worry, may the Church rediscover the spiritual simplicity you lived. May pastors be enlightened by the spirit of humility and mercy. May those who dedicate themselves to the mission of evangelization carry within them the quiet yet enduring flame of apostolic zeal, the flame that once burned within your heart even though you never left the convent. May religious communities grow steadfast in their contemplative vocation, so that their hidden lives may continue to strengthen the world through unceasing prayer. Little Saint of God, look upon families throughout the world. Many families stand before trials of division, illness, and the drying up of faith. Send forth the roses of love, as you promised in your final days. May each petal carry comfort to the suffering, hope to those who wander, and light to hearts seeking to return to God, but still searching for the way. These small roses are signs of holy presence, reminding us that you remain near, still interceding for us with the love you lived so completely. In this moment, may our prayer blend with your song, the song first lifted in the humble room of Carmel in Lisieux, and now still echoing within the church. Teach us to walk the little way with patience and trust. May every sacrifice, even the smallest, become a seed of love. Help us to see Christ in every event, so that our lives may become a journey toward Him. And finally, help us to answer your invitation, to live love in all things. That is the greatest legacy Saint Thérèse left behind. A simple spirituality, a steadfast faith, and a heart always turned toward God. May we follow you, so that in each day of our lives we too may whisper the words you offered in your final hour, "My God, I love you." May these prayers rise like a garland of roses offered before the throne of God, where Saint Thérèse continues to bloom in eternal light. I offer my blessing to all brothers and sisters who have liked this video. May God, through the intercession of the saints, grant you peace, health, and abundant grace in your lives. Return to the tabernacle, return to the light of the Holy Eucharist, return to the quiet companionship with the one who waits for us in the sacrament of love. And if in the words I have shared today, you have found even one or two sentences that touched your soul and helped you draw nearer to God, then I am already fulfilled.